Regarding the question of what makes Africa work, I'm pleased to say that searching for answers is not as exasperating as it might have been a decade ago. Today, we can demonstrate with clear examples that what makes Africa work are the ingenuity and the resilience of the people, especially 70% youth population, leadership and good governance, allowing the private sector and markets to function, focusing on infrastructural development, and of course the incredible opportunities that abound. Somehow, everyone has a hunch that if you're not around when Africa truly gets going, it'll be much like the skeptics who stood on the sidelines in the 1990s, convinced that China was going nowhere. How wrong they were. Strong visionary leadership committed to good governance has proved to be critical where our economies have recorded successes. Nigeria, earning 60% less revenue than 5 years ago, last year invested about 1.3 trillion naira in infrastructure, the largest capital spend in its history, and will increase that in the 2018 budget. Good governance, prudent management of resources means that you can do more with far less. Ethiopia delivered its light rail within Addis ahead of schedule, and of course the Ethiopia-Djibouti rail also, with little or no cost overruns. Rwanda has shrugged off the tragedy of genocide of barely 20 years ago, delivering on infrastructure, and has earned its place as the second easiest place to do business in Africa. Ghana is galloping away this year with GDP growth figures in excess of 8%. Across the continent, there is a commitment to providing much-needed infrastructure in the form of power stations, ports, rails, road networks, that not only bring down the cost of doing business, but also actively engage the private sector in funding, in operation, and in ownership. And I'll come back to this point. Nigeria recently announced the commencement of the process of concessioning its major airports with a view to attracting world-class investors and, of course, world-class operators. But perhaps most importantly, Africa now recognizes the limitations of governments, both in cash and capacity, to run businesses. The wisdom today is in letting the private sector invest wherever it can and in practically any sector of the economy, even in those sectors of the economy that once carried the halo of national security assets, such as telecoms and power. Consequently, we've seen the emergence of dynamic Pan-African investors who, on account of their track records, are even able to borrow commercially cheaper than governments. Aliko Dangote is, of course, an excellent example, with investments in cement manufacturing in nearly 10 African countries, and is about to complete a 650,000 barrel a day refinery in Lagos, the largest single-line refinery in the world, and larger than all 4 government-owned refineries put together. A dedicated 550-kilometer subsea pipeline passing through major gas processing hubs across the country, bringing crude to that refinery. He's also investing in a 3 million metric ton fertilizer plant in the same location, the largest single line in the world. Although the sizes of the investments may differ, the subtext is the same. The confidence of local African investors in the opportunities available on the continent. In broadband infrastructure, for example, there's Funke Okweke, the Nigerian-born broadband entrepreneur. Her company is called Main One, and that launched West Africa's first privately owned submarine cable. The cable was built over a 2-year period, and the initial investment of $240 million was financed entirely by African investors. And the project broke ground just over 2 years. The project broke even, just over 2 years after the launch. Even during the economic turbulence in 2016, private capital recognized the potential in infrastructure investments. General Electric infused $186 million in the phase 1 of the Nigeria Fast Power Program. And it entered into memoranda of understanding with 7 states in the country, in the north of Nigeria in particular, where radiation is highest, to supply 1,000 megawatts of solar power across the states. General Electric is also finalizing documentation for the concession of our Lagos to Kano narrow gauge rail line, which will focus on cargo transportation from the Apapa port, which is in Lagos, northwards passing through several economically strategic cities to Kano. Now, this involves a total investment of $2.2 billion. And the opportunities are enormous indeed. Let me tell you another very quick story. Nigeria's 180 million people, over 50 million have no access to power. As part of our diversifying power sources to improve access to power, we started a program of providing solar power in several thousand homes in the rural villages. We started in a village called Wuna village, just outside of Abuja. Wuna is an agrarian community, is not on the grid, and has no other source of power. To charge their phones, an entrepreneur with a small generator runs a service in the village. So you take your phone to his shop once a day or so, you pay a small fee for charging. Life in Wuna shuts down at about 7 p.m. until daylight. But working with a PPP model, the government-owned NDPHC, which is a government-owned power company, partnered with Azuri Technology, a private solar company, to provide a domestic solar solution. Azuri has provided the same end-to-end service in East Africa, a solar home system, including a payment system. And the system costs about 1,900 naira a month, which is about $7 a month. For the first time in its existence, the village now has running water, which is solar powered. The school has power. The school hall is now used as a community hall in the evenings. Each home has about 4 points of light. Children can now stay up and do some studying at night. Many of Wuna's women can process their millet and yams at night. New jobs have been created: solar installer, maintenance, payment system, people who run the payment system. Only one guy has lost his job, the phone charger in Wuna. So every household can now charge their phones. The point is, the point I think is that there are millions of homes waiting for solar power, and there are opportunities for very many Azuris. The opportunities in our power sector in particular are immense, especially as we open the sector further. Nigeria's Electricity Regulatory Commission in August issued the eligible customer directives, and will this month issue directives on independent metering. The eligible customer regime allows a willing seller, willing buyer arrangement in the sale of power, which effectively breaks the monopoly of DISCOs, of the distribution companies, to supply power exclusively. And so also the independent metering directive allows independent entities, aside from registered power distribution companies, to sell and install meters to customers and be paid directly as collections are made from metered customers. Now, this deepening of the privatization of the power sector is bound to create a fresh bounce in investment activity. The story of investors in agriculture in Nigeria is also worth hearing. Carlos is a Mexican farmer and proprietor of the San Carlos Farms, possibly the largest banana and pineapple farm project in Mexico. He partnered with local investors to replicate his very successful fruit and vegetable farm in Mexico, in Nigeria. The idea was to grow for export. He currently farms close to 5,000 hectares across 6 of Nigeria's 36 states. After his first harvest, he exported nothing, but turned in a decent profit. His partners asked him what the magic was. His answer was that we cannot even satisfy the local demand. Besides, according to him, it was even more lucrative to sell locally than to export. So agricultural production or manufacturing of fast-moving goods in a market the size of Nigeria and the adjoining ECOWAS market is quite frankly a no-brainer. Fahad Awad is a 29-year-old entrepreneur from Tanzania who set up a cashew processing facility in Tanzania. And this also underscores the immense opportunities in the agricultural value chain. The factory brings international standards and traceability to cashew nuts. The company's flagship processing facility is in Zanzibar and has an installed capacity of 2,500 tons per annum, and recently raised $500,000 from the Africa Enterprise Challenge Fund to establish another processing facility in Mtwara in southeastern Tanzania. But if I were a betting man, I would surely put my money on African businesses that demonstrate an awareness of how technology will be an exponential catalyst for business. All over Africa, telephony and technology are unearthing, literally, riches that were hitherto unknown. Kenya's M-Pesa has become the largest mobile telephony payment solution in the world. The story of how MTN in Nigeria became the largest mobile network in Africa in less than a decade is still the stuff of legendary investment stories. But the point to note is that those who missed that pioneer telecoms opportunity typically assumed that the Nigerian market was large but not rich enough to translate the numbers to cash. How wrong they were. Today, companies such as Flutterwave, a payment solutions company, Andela, a software development engineering company, Jobberman, an online human resource company, Konga, an online mall. These are poignant examples of how young African entrepreneurs are using technology disruptively to create profits in various business lines. And evidently, the smart money all over the world is paying attention. For example, Flutterwave saw an investment of $10 million, Konga an impressive $25 million US, the second largest amount raised by an African startup on the continent. And Andela attracted equity investment from Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg. Over the last few decades, the global perception of Africa has evolved from the hopeless continent, in quote, to the African rising rhetoric, to, quote, lions on the move. But however one chooses to slice this, the Africa growth story is real. Major global analysts appear at least united in the view that Africa has the highest number of economies projected to grow above 5% by 2030. Although in the last few years we've seen a number of African economies experience major economic challenges, including Nigeria, due to the crash in resource prices on the global market. And as a result, Africa's real GDP grew at an average of 3% a year between 2010 and 2015, considerably slower than the 5.4% from 2000 to 2010. And although FDIs and other capital flows to Africa have slowed and accessing global markets is tough, yet the overall picture may be misleading. When you unpack the average growth rate of the Africa region, you find a good number of outlier growth stories, such as Ghana, which I had mentioned earlier, which recorded a growth in excess of 9% year on year in GDP for the second quarter of 2017. I believe that's about the highest in the world. In 2016, many other African economies maintained high growth rates. For example, Ethiopia, Cote d'Ivoire grew by approximately 7%, while Kenya, Mauritius, Rwanda, and Senegal grew by about 6% on average. The rest of Africa posted accelerating an average annual rate of about 4.4% from 2010 to 2015, compared with 4.1% in 2000 to 2010. All told, despite the obvious fact that other human development indices have not advanced apace with growth figures, and I'm sure there will be plenty of opportunity to debate that point, I think it's evident that the continent's fundamentals are genuinely strong. But permit me to speak very quickly about some of the specific efforts that we're making in Nigeria to enable the private sector thrive. Specifically, in addition to ongoing investments in production and infrastructure, some of which I've referred to, we're undertaking extensive ease of doing business reforms. To start with, we worked assiduously to improve macroeconomic conditions. After a continuous slide in growth since 2014, the trend of growth in GDP has turned around with a modest 0.5% in the second quarter of this year, while inflation, though still somewhat high, has declined from its peak of 18.7 in January 2016 to 16% today. The outlook going forward is quite positive based on improvements in oil prices and production, and the trend of leading indicators such as positive purchasing managers' indices, a revived stock exchange, and increasing foreign exchange reserves. Moreover, the uncertainties in the foreign exchange market have abated with the introduction of the new window for investors and exporters, which is called NIFEX. Of course, NIFEX relies entirely on market, and there's greater transparency and guarantees of repatriation of funds. The results have been encouraging, as the inflows of capital in the second quarter of 2017 of about $1.8 billion were almost double the amount, $908 million, imported in the first quarter of the year. Indeed, investor interest remains undoubtedly strong, with announced investments of in excess of $20 billion from January to August 2017 in 41 projects across 22 states. And I think it bears emphasizing that Nigeria is a large economy, and several of the states are huge economies of their own. And going by the investments that are going directly to the states, it's evident that investors are recognizing that you can do business directly with some of the states of Nigeria because they simply have the capacity to be able to carry out whatever forms of business there are, whatever investments are put therein. Importantly, for the first time, coordinated efforts are underway to make it easier to do business in Nigeria. And through systemic changes, we are repositioning regulators as facilitators of business and are steadily improving transparency and efficiency of service delivery by the public sector. In the first stage, reforms were introduced under a 60-day national action plan focused on 8 areas that make it easier to register businesses, obtain construction permits, get credit, pay taxes, trade across borders, facilitate entry and exit of people, and register property. Practical examples of our successes include leveraging the use of technology to fast-track business registration and payment of taxes, and a functioning, tried and tested 48-hour electronic visa procedure, and an executive order mandating greater transparency and efficiency across all government agencies. The reforms have led to a reduction in cost and time, as well as greater transparency for small and medium-sized enterprises in particular. These reforms are complemented by a welcoming attitude to investment, to properly guide investors and make it easier for them to access required information. The NIPC, or the National Investment Promotion Commission, will be releasing a compendium of investment incentives in Nigeria by the end of this month. Similarly, we've recently reviewed and revised our Pioneer Status Program, which gives 5-year tax holidays across eligible sectors. And of course, in some cases, tax holidays can also be negotiated in excess of the 5-year period. Following the 70% success rate achieved in the first phase of the ease of doing business reforms, we recently embarked on a second national action plan, which will have 11 areas of focus and will run for 60 days from October 2017. The Nigerian government is intent on bringing about rapid, sustainable, and inclusive growth in order to improve the lot of the dynamic and hardworking people of Nigeria. And we realize that the scale of the challenge is huge, given our large, rapidly growing population and the relentless march of other parts of the world. We are nevertheless determined and optimistic that Nigeria, along with the rest of the continent, will bring about an Africa that will work for its people and contribute to global growth and prosperity. I think that the main lesson that Africa has learned and that African governments have learned is that there is no African exceptionalism. What makes Africa work is what makes economies work anywhere. Honest, visionary leadership and good governance, letting the private sector and markets lead, diversification from resource-based revenues, and developing the human potential that is so available within the continent. I'm convinced that what makes Africa work is what will work anywhere else. And I think that's been tried and demonstrated in so many African economies, especially in the past few years. Thank you very much. Thank you.